From the studios of the Optimism Institute, welcome to Blue Sky, where we share stories and insights to remind us that there is always blue sky above. Sometimes you just have to get your head above the clouds to see it. I'm your host, Bill Burke. On this Blue Sky episode, my guest is someone who overcame significant challenges as a child and in the process developed a sense of empathy and a desire to help others cope with life's inevitable difficulties. Dr. Kate Lund is a licensed clinical psychologist and performance coach with more than 15 years' experience. She's the author of Bounce, Help Your Child Build Resilience and Thrive in School, Sports, and Life. And her latest book is Step Away, The Keys to Resilient Parenting. Dr. Lund also hosts Resilient Parenting with Dr. Kate, a podcast that explores the science and lived experience of resilience through conversations with parents, educators, clinicians, and leaders. I hope you enjoy this Blue Sky conversation with Dr. Kate Lund as much as I did. Dr. Kate Lund, welcome to the Blue Sky Podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, I've enjoyed learning more about you and your work. And like so many people I meet, and certainly the ones I interview, it seems to me your work and your adult life was shaped a lot by your upbringing. And you had a very difficult physical medical challenge growing up, hydrocephalus. Can you share with us what that was like, and then maybe how that has informed the way you see the world and the type of attitude that you bring to it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And it's very true. My childhood with hydrocephalus was very much something that has informed the way I look at the world today, my direction in career, all of it. I was diagnosed with hydrocephalus when I was 4. The good news is that hydrocephalus can be managed with something called a shunt, which circulates the cerebral spinal fluid, which is not circulating on its own for whatever reason. And so that's the good news. The bad news is that shunts break, particularly in childhood. So I spent a lot of my childhood, early years, in and out of the hospital, having shunt revisions, coming back to school, looking different, feeling different, just all that stuff. I had these giant glasses. I had to wear a huge hockey helmet when I skated with my classmates. And yeah, it was hard. Those years were hard, but I had a lot of great support from my family, from the parents of friends, from teachers. And the message I got during those years, and it was easier sometimes than others, but the message that I got was focus on what you can do as opposed to what you can't do. And for me, honestly, that message might have taken a while to sink in, but it made all the difference in the long run.
Fascinating. Yeah, I can only imagine, your classmates, I'm sure you had some that were very understanding and some who were less so. And so later in life, as you're yourself a parent, you could have a different sense of empathy for what kids go through. So one of the themes or sort of a triad that you seem to come back to in your work is flexibility, optimism, and gratitude. And everything you just described, of the flexibility clearly in your upbringing, did you have a sense of optimism when you were younger? Did you think as a young kid, I'm going to get through this, I can survive this? Or were there times where you just thought, this is too much, this is unfair? Were you born optimistic, or did you sort of have to work on that as you went through these challenges?
That's a great question. And I think that ultimately I was born with a high degree of optimism. I mean, I've always been a glass half full type of person. And I don't remember sort of overtly in those early years that I was thinking, wow, this is just so hard. I was thinking, yeah, okay, I just need to move forward. It was almost like I knew and accepted what my context was. And I think I had very strong examples from my parents because they weren't obviously they were managing the challenges as they came up and I got the care I needed and all that. But when the shunt was working, we didn't dwell on it. I was expected to, do my chores, my homework. I was a typical kid. And that I think was really important because we didn't really dwell on the hard stuff unless it was like in our face. And I know that my dad particularly was a very optimistic guy. Sadly, he died 10 years ago. But I'll tell you something that really illustrates that with him is that we were out playing golf right around a year before he died. He had Parkinson's and he was struggling. And we were on the golf course together. It was something we loved to do. And he was really struggling. But he was up there on the tee and he said to me, he said, you know, it doesn't matter how far you can hit the ball. It matters that you can hit the ball at all. And I think that was quite a representation of the messages and the attitudes that I had and I was receiving growing up because something that really did define me when things were going well with the shunt was tennis as a kid. And I played a lot with my dad and I played a lot. I mean, I was pretty good. I was never the best, but I was good. But there were a lot of matches I didn't win and there were a lot of times I didn't win and that was okay as long as I was out there doing my best. And I think that lens that I looked through was largely a result of the messages I got from my parents.
It's a beautiful story on the golf course because I'm wondering, your dad didn't have to say that out loud. And part of that might have been him encouraging himself, but absolutely relaying that message to you, I would think. And so, we said before we started, I mentioned my kids are grown, but you never stop being a parent. He was still your dad when he told you that. And it's beautiful that you remember that and relay it just now.
100%. Yeah, it's a very powerful message and it really defines who my dad was. Very much optimistic and very much glass half full. And, there were some really, really challenging moments in the medical kind of experience that I had over time, particularly when I was 18. They finally figured out why I had the hydrocephalus. And it happened that I had this thing called a tectoglioma, which is a low grade usually childhood tumor blocking the aqueduct. And they couldn't see that early on because the imaging technology hadn't advanced that far. So, throughout 4 to 18, they were like, well, you have hydrocephalus. We're not sure why. But then the MRI with gadolinium came out and it showed this thing. And so I had some pretty rough surgeries that year between high school and college. I actually ended up having to take a year off and I was very, very sick for that entire year. And I just remember, yeah, just like one foot, like literally, I know it's a cliche, but one foot in front of the other. Like that was what it was. And I think that was also reinforced by my parents. They were like, yeah, got to do what we got to do. And, there was a long time I couldn't really use my eyes and I was kind of sitting there, but you move forward as you can. And that was, I think, what I did. So easier said than done, but yeah.
If we think back on our own childhood, it's not hard to imagine just how difficult Kate's must have been, dealing as she did with hydrocephalus and its challenging and potentially stigmatizing symptoms. Thankfully, she says she was born optimistic and was able to focus on moving forward and also on managing her own benchmarks. Her father developed Parkinson's disease later in life, and on the course, he told his daughter before teeing off, "It doesn't matter how far you can hit the ball, it matters that you can hit it at all." Now, back to our conversation. Where in this journey did your interest in psychology come?
I think sort of inadvertently, sort of not really consciously, very early on. I was always interested in people and understanding kind of what was going on with people and, really interested in medical situations. I did volunteer work at the hospital when I was, in my sort of pre-high school days, when I could and stuff like that. But it wasn't really until later on in high school when I took a couple psychology classes and, then I got to college and I knew that that was sort of an area I wanted to focus in specifically. And that's what I did. But I'll tell you that when I graduated from college, I wasn't ready to go right back to grad school. In fact, it wasn't even on my radar, even though I knew that I was going to end up as a psychologist at some point. So I went off and I did some work, marketing and PR in Washington, D.C. after a senior year internship at the White House doing communications work. And that was a fascinating experience. And I think gave me a slice of psychology as well, but also gave me the slice that, wow, this fast paced media stuff is not for me. I couldn't, I found myself setting up chairs a lot on the White House
Yeah.
lawn at like 4 a.m. and, and,
Wow.
and I saw the newscasters and the makeup and the hair and the intensity. And I was like, whoa, this isn't me, but it was a fabulous experience. And it made me want to move back to DC and I did for numerous years before grad school. And, turned out to be a good move. I met my husband there. So yeah.
I think one of the great gifts is something like that happened to you where you have a job early in your life that you might have thought, boy, that's a dream job. I'm sure you had friends who said, you're working at the White House. It must be the greatest thing ever. And and then when you decided it might not be, they thought the problem was you, but they have no idea what really goes into it.
Yeah. And I think, you got to really calibrate around, disposition and where you're going to flourish. And I knew that wasn't my space long term, but the opportunity was amazing.
So you've written 2 books now, and you're best known for your work on parenting. And I'm curious to know, did you start focusing on that in your research before you were a parent? After you became a parent, where did that happen? And I imagine it's very interesting. We all, I think, second guess ourselves in everything we do, but certainly in parenting, there's really, other than your books, there aren't a whole lot of great handbooks out there. Where did that interest come along specifically for parenting?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think in part based on my own early experiences, and then really started to solidify when I was doing my fellowship in psychology at Shriners Hospital for Children in Boston, as well as a sort of a joint program with Mass General. And it was there that I really started to focus on the role or the experience that parents have when a child has a serious medical situation, physical injury, that kind of thing. And so did a qualitative study around the experience of pressure garment therapy for kids recovering from catastrophic burn injuries, and kind of the role of parents was central in that. And I had some really great supervisors who are very deep into that world, that research angle in the world of psychology. And so it was there that I think the seed really was planted and started to grow. And I've just taken it from there in a very qualitative way ever since. I haven't published any significant studies since that point, but everything I've done has sort of been based off of that foundation. And I think that is really where it all started.
And a lot of your work centers on resilience in children and how to raise resilient kids. Again, I'm assuming some of that comes from your own personal background. You certainly had to embody resilience. You saw it in these difficult hospital settings. And I love your 7 pillars of the resilient child. And it's one of the things about your work that got my attention because a lot of these you might hear from other folks talking about parenting. I'll just list them, the pillars of resilient child: tolerating frustration and managing emotions, navigating friendships and social pressures, sustaining focus and attention, developing courage, building motivation, finding confidence, creating optimism. So that certainly got my attention. I'm curious to know, let's start with why the focus on resilience? You'll have some people say, oh, we're going to teach you how to raise kids who are smart. We're going to teach you how to raise kids who are going to get into good school. We're going to teach you how to raise athletes, and you do get into sports as well. What about resilience? Why is that something that you think is so important and that you focused on?
I believe resilience, the ability to not only bounce back from challenge when it arises, and it's inevitably going to arise, but to really be integrating tools and strategies that are going to optimize our own sense of well being. In other words, making us stronger to manage those challenges. So, sort of creating resilience as more of a lifestyle view is really at the foundation of all of those other things that you mentioned. And I think it's really at the core of enabling us to show up fully across the domains of our lives. And I feel like instilling the foundation in how to make that happen is so vital for all of us, but our kids in particular.
And this might be an unfair question because I don't know if it's as much in the scope of your work, but I love history and I love thinking about trends and how things have changed. I'll just throw this out there. My sense is that generations past, resilience was not assumed, but we didn't even really have to, as parents didn't even really focus on it. Like life's tough, suck it up, go to school, do your work. But over time, I think we've become maybe a little bit more the sort of helicopter parenting, the bubble wrapping our kids, don't ride a bike, or if you do, you better do the safety thing, and right? Do you think we've become less comfortable thinking about raising resilient kids, less comfortable with what you said that bad things are going to happen? Is that a trend or am I making that up?
Well, I think that the trend is in what you mentioned, the helicoptering, the bubble wrapping, the lawn mowing, like all of that stuff. But I'm kind of talking about with the resilience, the other side of that, so that we're setting kids up in a way with a strong foundation. So all that stuff, the bubble wrapping and the helicoptering, isn't really needed, right? That kids are able to believe in themselves from the inside out, to problem solve in a developmentally appropriate way, and to believe in their ability to navigate challenge, advocate for themselves, that sort of thing. Easier said than done because, yeah, I got to kind of change the lens that lots of parents are looking through as well. But yeah, I hope that answers the question.
It does. It absolutely does. And then you talk about creating optimism. So that's the seventh of your pillars. I don't know if they're in order of importance or in order of how these things might happen, but it's an age-old debate. You said you were born more optimistic than most. I was as well, but I do think, you can work on those things and you come right out and say it, creating optimism. How can you say, and how would you advise parents to create optimism in their children as they're growing up?
Yeah, so that's a really great question and an important one, right? Because, yeah, some people are born more optimistic than others and all of that. But one thing that I really suggest to basically everybody that I'm working with, particularly those who are caught in like a loop, negative self talk loop, and kind of the glass is half empty or the glass might not have anything in it, sort of that's human nature, right? We're led to all the things that are hard, all the things that are going badly, the would have, could have, should have. But if we sit down, either on our own as parents, but encouraging our kids once they're developmentally in a place to do this, sit down and jot down 3 to 5 things that went well on a given day, and really focus in on those things in an intentional way. We're shifting that lens at least back to neutral, maybe even a little bit into the positive space. But what we're doing is we're creating the ability to more naturally see the things that are going well, and sometimes they're hard to pick out, but that's a really important exercise to do with our kids. And it's really one of the fundamental ways to build that foundation in optimism.
I absolutely love that because I also think it applies to parents. It applies to adults who don't have kids, who empty nesters, whatever it is. I interviewed early on Bert Jacobs, who's a friend who helped found Life is Good, the apparel company. It's all about optimism. And I asked the question, where's your optimism come from? He said, 100% my mom. And he grew up in a tough environment, not a lot of money, things were tight. But he said every night at dinner, his mom would say, what was the best thing that happened to you today? And a lot of parents, and I used to do this, so tell me about your day. And especially, teenagers, like, they probably don't want to, and B, they're not gonna lead with the best thing that happened. It just doesn't happen. But if you push that, and then if you can wire yourself as you're getting at to be that way in life, I always tell people, if you change your aperture to look, try to catch people being good, try to find good things going on around you. The shocking part is how easy it is to see. The challenge is, as you implied, we're just being pumped all this negativity, and we respond to it. And it makes me think of social media and algorithms too. So if you click on the positive things and you share the things that are more upbeat, going to get more of that. Kate Lund developed an early interest in medicine, and eventually high school and college courses sparked more curiosity about psychology. She then landed a job working at the White House, and while many would consider this a dream, she realized that this kind of fast-paced, long and crazy hours world was not for her. Her work on parenting and child psychology led her to develop the 7 pillars of the resilient child, and I think it's a great list. She says that resilience is the foundation of everything, and I was of course pleased to see creating optimism as one of the keys here. Now back to my blue sky conversation with Dr. Kate Lund, and a subject we talk about a lot here at the Optimism Institute: social media. I'm wondering, from your research or for just your own personal opinion, what role has social media played in some of these things? I think my sense is, with a lot of challenges that we have, they've always been there. Social media didn't create them, but sometimes they make them a little tougher. So, for example, kids invariably compare themselves to other kids. Parents compare their kids to other parents' kids. I'm wondering, from your research, what role social media has played in some of these things, where it's in your face when so-and-so got into the college you wanted to get to, or it's in your face when they got the MVP award in the hockey tournament. So anyway, very long question. I'm just curious to know your thoughts in general on parenting, social media, and what the impact's been.
Ooh, the impact is huge.
Yeah.
It's intense. And you just mentioned the college thing. We're deep in the college thing here with one of our boys, and ooh, it's rough, right?
Yeah. It shouldn't
And
be, but it is.
oh, it's so rough. And it's yeah, and it feels like social media kind of across the board for the kids and for us as parents exacerbates the intensity of it, because there's so much hitting us in the face about college admissions and what you have to do and who got in where, and the destination pages and all of the things. And the process looks different for all kids, right? And that kind of applies to everything social media wise. And so I think it's so important to help our kids, help ourselves to understand and appreciate our own unique context, and try so hard not to go down that comparison road, which, with social media hitting us from all angles, is next to impossible. And I wish I had the easy answer, because I really am living this college thing right now, and I am doom scrolling way too much, and I wish I weren't, but I am. And it's a tough thing, but I think ultimately, you know, kind of taking the college thing out of it, with social media in general, it's really important to talk to our kids about the reality of what we're really seeing out there. Oftentimes, we're seeing the highlight reels, we're seeing the best moments in people's lives, and we don't even know if they're grounded in reality. We've got AI, we've got all the things. So I think talking through those realities at a foundational level is super important. And also, really, mm, over time, and this is a process, but really helping our kids to understand and develop that sense of awareness of who they are and appreciating themselves within their own unique context. And I think that, I mean, that was a very important piece for me early on, because I really understood who I was and what my context was. And I worked within that context to be my best. And I get it, easier said than done. My circumstances were a little unusual, but I think that message is an important one because the comparison trap can really be damaging for the well-being of our kids, for our well-being. I mean, it's brutal.
Absolutely. And not to make you worry about when you're through the college process. Another thing I observed in our kids' generation was there's all this pressure. You get to the school, you have a bad day, which you're going to do, and you go online and you see your friends all having the greatest time ever, and it's like, why didn't I go to that school? I should, you know what I mean? It's just this thing, and so I think some of it too is just lessening the use in general. And then the phrase that always helps me is you're comparing your insides to everybody else's outsides, right? So how you're feeling
100%.
versus
That's great. I
this
love that.
this
I love that.
phony
Mhm.
outside that's being presented. So I think that's really important. Well, let's talk about your more recent book, Step Away, which came out last summer of 25, and you talk about the pressures of modern parenting. And let's start with the title. How did you come up with the title Step Away, and what's the meaning of that in your work?
Yeah. So Step Away, I came up with it as I was sort of considering all sorts of different titles and kind of wanted it to illustrate the main point of what the book is trying to capture. And that's basically how can we create space to optimize our own sense of well-being as parents? And in doing that, how do we model that and pass along that foundation to our kids and our families and show up fully across the domains of our lives? So it's sort of a overarching way that I came up with the title. And what it means is it basically means stepping away to create space to optimize your well-being as a parent such that you're then able to step in more robustly and more fully for your kids, for your family, and across the domains of your life.
Got it. And in the domains of parents, more often than not, working at a job, you've got all these other things going on. And the parenting never goes away. It's a 24/7 responsibility. So let's talk about what you talk about, a resilient mindset for parents as well, I think, in the work. Can you talk about what does resilience look like for parents versus for kids?
Yeah. And so one important point to make is that the 7 pillars of the resilient child outlined in Bounce really apply to all of us across the lifespan. So we're kind of integrating those as well. But in Step Away, I really focus in on this idea of managing your stress response as a parent. So, having a strategy in place that you're practicing consistently, kind of integrating into your way of being and living, so that you're showing up level as possible each day, not showing up here, such then when the challenge hits, you're going to boom, escalate to the point of shutdown. We don't want that. So I teach a technique called the relaxation response that was developed by a physician in Boston in the 1970s named Herbert Benson. And super simple technique. That's why I love it so much. You come up with a word or a phrase that you find soothing in some way, and you breathe. Very simple. 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes later in the day. So you're kind of bookending the day with what it feels like to be in that modulated space. And after a period of consistent practice, and it has to be consistent, you start to integrate that. It becomes more of your baseline. Not going to be perfect, but it's going to help you ride the challenges more like waves. Because let's face it, we're all going to have challenges day in, day out. They just happen. But we don't want to ever be up here because then we're not going to show up. So lots of stuff on that in Step Away. Self awareness, understanding ourselves as parents, as people, what we need to be at our best looks different for all of us. There's no one size fits all in parenting, life, or any of it. And so we go on from there. Emotional intelligence, how we're creating an authentic human relationship with our child, how we're understanding how our way of being, behaving impacts others out there in the world. That's a really important piece of it. So we build from those pillars in Step Away.
Yeah, and the authenticity one, I'm a huge believer in authenticity in I guess everything, and certainly in my experience in leadership roles and business and things like that. It's an interesting question for parents because I think as parents, most of us struggle with, okay, am I the dad? Am I their friend? Am I their confidant? Am I their disciplinarian? There are these different roles. And depending how you play it, it can be very inauthentic. If hey pal, try to be their friend when I'm not, I'm their dad. Do you help parents sort of navigate through that? Because it's a really tricky one. I hadn't really thought about authenticity in the parent's role until you just said that.
Yeah, that's really a great question, and it's true. You kinda, like, cycle through different points, but you wanna kinda create a foundational human connection with your child such that they know that you're there to support them. They sort of know the parameters of your expectations in a certain way so that hopefully maybe there isn't a lot of overt disciplinarian stuff needing to happen. Easier said than done. I'm not saying that's gonna be perfect at all. Um, but at a core level, really, one of the most important pieces is having space to kind of connect with them each and every day so that they know that you're a pillar of their world, and that you're there and you'll listen to what they have to say without always jumping in there to fix it or tell them how to approach something or what to do, but just to kind of be there. Not that they're always going to be like sharing all sorts of stuff with you or anything like that, but yeah. And then the other really important piece in this foundational, authentic human connection is not being afraid to share your challenges in a developmentally appropriate way with your kids. You don't want your kids to see you as infallible or perfect or anything like that because that's going to make them think like it's not okay to fail or it's not okay to make a mistake or it's not okay to tell mom or dad when that's happened. So you want to make it clear that, you know, you've had challenges too, of course, in a developmentally appropriate way. And maybe this is how you handled it. You don't have to handle it the same way, but the point is you got through it. You're on the other side. You're able to, despite a challenge, despite a mistake, that kind of thing. So that's at the core of that relationship, that authentic relationship as well.
I think that's a huge piece of advice for parents where oftentimes you do feel like, well, I need to be this paragon of adult perfection and kids can very easily, like you said, think their parents are infallible and that sort of thing. And often it's not until adulthood or after somebody dies where they, oh my gosh, they had all kinds of issues versus, selectively and like you said, at the appropriate age level and all that, sharing the challenges that you've had to normalize that life is not always going to be perfect and that you're far from it as well. That's a really solid piece of advice, I think, and it's also something that doesn't come naturally to a lot of parents because, again, they feel like they've got to put on this facade.
Right. Exactly. And that can generalize across domains, right? We don't want to necessarily be vulnerable out there. And that's vulnerability is important because it really strengthens that human connection.
Kate Lund believes, as I do, that social media has made many age-old challenges even tougher for today's kids and their parents. The comparison trap is something we all should be aware of and try to avoid. Her latest book is Step Away, and in it, Kate encourages parents to step away on occasion to take care of themselves and not burn themselves out taking care of their kids. And I really like Kate's emphasis on just showing up. We're all going to make mistakes in our relationships, and for those of us who are parents, that includes with our kids. But doing our best to be there, to show up, and to listen goes a very long way. Now, to the final segment of my conversation with Dr. Kate Lund. So when you talk about resilience, I think about grit as well. And Angela Duckworth certainly has made a name for herself, literally with that word grit. is her advice, is she someone that you think is on to something when she talks about grit? Do you think it's a little overboard with the way she describes it, or how do you align with someone like Duckworth, who's certainly well known in the general field that you're working in?
Yeah, no, grit is really important, and I think that Angela Duckworth's work is really it's amazing, and it's very, very important piece of the puzzle. But again, there's more. There's that authenticity in the relationship and all of that, and I think that foundation really helps kids, helps all of us have grit, have perseverance, be able to move forward. That whole piece.
So, in developing the resilience and grit in your children, my experience was that there were often moments where there was this, okay, do I jump in here and help, or do I let them suffer this one through? And an example I always think of is, well, we have a boy and a girl, so they'll know which one I'm talking about. Our son, at that age where boys are generally, it seems, just wildly disorganized, I don't know, 11, 12, 13, was very good about doing his homework, really bad about remembering to put it in his backpack and taking it to school. So you'd get I forgot my homework. So he did the homework. Do I grab the homework and drive it to the school to bail him out, or do I? So that's just one example, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on those are tough decisions for parents. When do I let them learn from this and have to suck it up, and when do you jump in? Is that something that you've addressed in your research and have feelings about?
Yeah, that's a great question and so hard, right? Because did it, but needs it at school, doesn't have it. And, we had that exact scenario with one of our boys here. Oftentimes, right around like sixth grade, seventh grade, he was online most of the time. So I'm talking about like sixth grade, it was like really, really prominent. And it's a hard question. So the way we handled it here was, kind of like make it clear, like, hey, dude, this is your responsibility. Like, don't forget your homework. And there were those moments when he did. I brought it one time. And
Yeah,
then I was
I think
like,
that
okay.
I think that's what we did.
and
Yeah,
and so that was sort of how I handled it. You sort of kind of talk about the parameter and then, okay, got that free pass, happens. And then hopefully the learning will happen from there. And I'm not saying that it was perfect here. There were moments when he had to then grapple and explain to the teacher what happened, why he didn't have his homework. But I think that opportunity is really important. And I'll tell you that experience for him, not having the homework in sixth grade, stakes are a bit lower, right? But I'm convinced that those moments when he had to advocate or at a beginning level advocate for himself have really helped him later on. He actually went off to boarding school in Connecticut, his choice. Life-changing experience for him. It's been amazing. It's been so good. But academically, it was like a huge step up from what he was doing out here. And, having those seeds of, okay, what do I do? How do I, you know, talk to a teacher when something's hard or when I messed up and I didn't do my homework or I misunderstood an assignment was really, really important for him. So I think within the scope of what your child can handle, that is the way to go. And, there might need to be some scaffolding along the way. Certain kids might not be in the place to handle quite as much right away. So then you put more scaffolding in. So it's about knowing your child and knowing kind of what you think they need. But that's how we handled it here.
yeah. No, I miss those days, and I don't miss those days. To be perfectly
Right.
frank. With the time we have left, I'd like to go back to optimism. And you mentioned before that helping kids be grateful is a great way to help them build their optimism. What are some others that parents should be thinking about?
I think at a foundational level, it's the daily wins exercise. It's asking questions like, what was the best thing that happened today? Or, and why, and helping them to sort of articulate that as opposed to going right to the challenge or the bad thing that happened. But also, really important in that is to, when the challenges come up and all that, acknowledge the challenges, but then don't stay mired in that. Of course, you have to acknowledge it, and it's real. Challenges are always real, but then help your child look beyond the challenge to what might be possible on the other side of that challenge. And I think that's a really, really important strategy, as well as something that we can model as parents by never losing sight of the possibilities that are out there on the other side of the challenges. Because we don't want our kids to ever get stuck in the challenge, like the challenge is the only thing there is, because that will detract from optimism. But being able to see the possibility will build it and will make it more of a internalized construct for the kid over time.
I love that. And back to where we started with your college process. It's a hard thing to do, but on the other side of it, it's going to work out. They're going to get into some schools, and they might not be at the very top of their list right now, or they might be, but either way, they're going to make great friends wherever they go. They're going to have great teachers wherever they go, and it works out. And so that'd be my non-professional but older kids advice to the expert who's on the other side of this conversation.
Well, and I so appreciate that. And I tell you that I've heard that time and again, and I'm trying very hard to integrate it myself. My son is not ready to hear that yet because I've tried. I've tried to say it out loud, and it has not landed well. So we're hoping for anyway, it's a process.
It'll all work great. Are you working on, now you also have a podcast we should mention. Tell us about your podcast, and I'm curious to know if you have any other books up your sleeve.
Excellent. Yes. So I had a podcast called The Optimized Mind for 3 years. I wrapped that in November with a new podcast starting up March 5th called Resilient Parenting with Dr. Kate. And that is a companion to my book, Step Away.
Oh, great. Oh, so that's just launching this year.
Yes. Yep. The new podcast.
I misunderstood that. Oh, terrific.
Exactly. That one's new. The Optimized Mind, amazing project, much more general lens on resilience, and went for 3 years, but I wanted to sort of hone in on themes related specifically to the book. So I shifted gears. I'm starting this new show March 5th.
That's the perfect podcast for parents to listen to after they drop their kids in carpool.
Yes, exactly.
There's your marketing angle right there.
Exactly.
Well, Dr. Lund, it's been a real pleasure to speak with you. I love your approach to parenting. I think it's remarkable what you've been able to overcome in your own life, and now raising a family of your own and sharing your wisdom and knowledge and great advice with people. It's a real gift, and I wish you nothing but the best going forward, and I really appreciate your time today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. There's so much great advice from Kate Lund here. And in addition to fostering a sense of gratitude in children and a focus on the positive parts of their daily lives, I really like the idea of focusing on the possibilities on the other side of challenges. It's a simple and helpful concept for all of us. And do check out the Resilient Parenting Podcast with Kate Lund. It has indeed launched and is available wherever you get your podcasts. I hope you enjoyed this Blue Sky conversation with Dr. Kate Lund. Before you go, please consider leaving us a rating or review. These help us bring attention to the show, and your feedback gives us ideas for how we might make our presentations better. This and all episodes of Blue Sky are made possible by the skilled editing and mixing of the great crew at Sound On, Sound Off. To learn more about them, check out soundonsoundoff.com. Crush Graphics is responsible for the terrific graphics and cover art for Blue Sky and the Optimism Institute. That's Crush with a K. You can find them at crushgraphics.com. Till next time, I'm the founder of the Optimism Institute and host of Blue Sky, Bill Burke, and I thank you for listening.